to create the acid bubbles or popping bubbles that I use in this animation, I created them as symbols. Now, as you might recall, when we took notes on how to create symbols, I gave you two different methods. The first was to create the symbol within the overall animation, and the second was to create a separate animation and import the SWF file as a symbol. That's the method that we're going to use for the popping bubbles. So first thing that I did was create a little animation that actually depicts those bubbles floating up and then popping. As you can see, I have a lot of layers. Everything that moves gets its own layer, so you could see the first little bubble, and we'll turn these layers off and I'll show them to you one at a time. So the first little bubble, you see it floating up, and then burst number 1 occurs, so the bubble moves up and it bursts. That's as simple as it is. It goes from an image of a circle with a little highlight in it, moving from the lower frame to the top of the frame or the stage, and then there's a frame with a burst. It's as simple as that. Let's look at the next one, the second little bubble. It overlaps in movement. Some of it is at the same time. Staggering the starts of different objects moving lends itself to create more realism. So in this case, you see the bubbles holding for a few frames, then it moves, holds a few frames, then it moves, holds a few more, then it moves, holds a few more, and then I do frame by frame by frame as it moves up, and all of a sudden there's a burst. So that's our second burst we've seen. Now the last is the big bubble, and that's the larger bubble. It is holding for one frame each as it moves up a little slow, but not as slow as the second bubble. And of course, let's turn the last on, and it's a bigger pop. Let's turn them all of them on now, and look at that, and Command Return to view it. Now, I'm seeing this as an SWF or Flash movie file. This movie file is what we are going to import into the other animation as a symbol. So we're back to this animation. We're going to create a new, did I just create a new layer inside? I did. Okay, let me get rid of that. Okay, we're going to create a new folder. First of all, this folder is popping bubbles or just bubbles, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and we do also need layers inside of it. So let's first of all drag layer 6 into bubbles, and let's call it pop 1-R for right. So pop 1 on the right, or I could do RIGHT on the right. And whatever frame I want that first bubble to appear on, I should put a keyframe. I will just start it right at the beginning. There's a keyframe on frame 1. However, first I have to import that burst. So, File, Import to Library. You don't want to ever import directly to the stage unless it's just a background image. Even then, I like to just put everything in my library and pull it out as needed. So, we're going to import your symbol to the library. And of course, I have many layers to go through to actually get to it. It's in our class folder, and it's in our animation folder. Burst, SWF, click open. If you'll notice, all of a sudden there's a lot of stuff in your library. First of all, you should see the .swf. You'll see part of the imagery, and there's a play button in the top right corner, and it allows you to see part, at least, of that symbol's animation. You don't have to ever do anything with all of these other symbols that are appearing. These are just the individual pieces of art that go with the symbol we've imported, and it'll live in your library, but you don't really need to do anything with it. So we have the keyframe selected on the proper layer, and let's drag the first burst out. Now it's a little bit big, so why don't we shrink it a bit? We'll take the transform tool and we're just going to squash it down a bit, and let's command return and see what we have here. Look at that. I have an animation inside of an animation. And that is how symbols will work. If I simply press play, you notice there was no animation occurring with that, because just pressing play will not show you what's animated inside of a symbol. You must always do the command return or control return, depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC. Now, you might want to have many of those bubbles. You should create a separate layer for each. You might call it pop 2. You might give it directions. Maybe this one is on the left. And again, you might want them starting at the same time. You might want them starting at different times. So the first pop is happening on the first frame, or beginning on the first frame. And the second one I'll start on the second frame. And let's say we bring it over here. You could resize them to be the same or to be slightly different. That's up to you. Of course, I'm having trouble moving it, so let me zoom in on it for a minute. Command plus allows me to zoom in. Command minus allows me to zoom out. Okay, let's see what we've done. Look at that, 2 sets of popping bubbles. It's a nice added detail. The more detail, sometimes the more life you bring to your animation, makes it more interesting. People want to look at it longer. These are things to think about.